There is a question that frustrates countless people in relationships. Why does an avoidant keep making the same mistakes? Why do they promise to change, only to repeat the same patterns? Why do they pull away after getting close, shut down after opening up, and run the moment love starts feeling real? The answer isn't as simple as saying they don't care. Most avoidants aren't repeating these mistakes because they enjoy hurting people. They're repeating them because their emotional programming is stronger than their conscious intentions. Think about that for a moment. A person can sincerely want love and still sabotage it. A person can miss you deeply and still refuse to call. A person can regret losing someone and still make the exact same choices in the next relationship. This isn't because they are incapable of change. It's because repeating familiar pain often feels safer than facing unfamiliar vulnerability. Most people assume that when an avoidant walks away from a relationship, it's because they stopped caring. They believe the distance is proof that the feelings were never real, but that assumption misses what is often happening beneath the surface. The truth is, avoidants frequently experience an internal conflict between what they want emotionally and what their nervous system tells them is safe. They may genuinely desire love, connection, and companionship. Yet the moment those things become real, something inside them begins to panic. Their mind starts interpreting closeness not as comfort, but as a potential threat. This is why familiar pain often feels safer than emotional risk. Think about it this way. Imagine someone who has spent years living in a dark room. Even if you open the curtains and let sunlight pour in, their first reaction may not be gratitude. It may be discomfort because their eyes have adjusted to the darkness. The light isn't dangerous, but it feels unfamiliar. Emotional intimacy works the same way for many avoidants. Healthy love can feel strange because emotional distance has become their normal. When a relationship begins, everything often feels exciting. There is enough space, enough mystery, and enough independence to keep the avoidant comfortable. But as trust grows, expectations naturally grow as well. Conversations become deeper. Vulnerability increases. Future plans start to form. This is the point where many avoidants begin to experience emotional pressure. They may not even realize why their feelings are changing. All they know is that something suddenly feels overwhelming. Instead of recognizing that fear, they often misinterpret it. They tell themselves they need more space. They convince themselves the relationship is moving too fast. Sometimes they begin focusing on their partner's flaws, magnifying small imperfections until they seem like major problems. Other times they throw themselves into work, hobbies, or personal goals, believing that staying busy will quiet the uncomfortable emotions building inside them. These actions are rarely planned. They are automatic survival strategies that have been reinforced over many years. Ironically, creating distance gives them immediate relief. The anxiety settles down. The emotional pressure decreases. For a brief moment, they feel like themselves again. Their brain registers this relief as proof that pulling away was the right decision. Without realizing it, they reward the very behavior that keeps them trapped. The next time intimacy creates anxiety, they repeat the same response because it worked before. Over time, this cycle becomes deeply ingrained. What makes this pattern especially heartbreaking is that the relief never lasts. Once the relationship fades and enough time passes, the loneliness slowly begins to replace the anxiety. They remember the laughter, the conversations, the emotional safety they once had, and they wonder why they couldn't simply stay. Yet, when another opportunity for closeness appears, the same fear often returns because the underlying emotional programming has never changed. Breaking this cycle requires far more than good intentions. It demands the willingness to stay present during moments that feel emotionally uncomfortable instead of escaping them. It means recognizing that fear is not always a warning sign. Sometimes fear simply means you're stepping into unfamiliar territory where real growth begins. The avoidant who learns this lesson starts replacing automatic escape with conscious choice, and that is the moment lasting change finally becomes possible. One of the biggest misconceptions about avoidance is that they are emotionally strong simply because they appear so independent. They often seem calm under pressure, self-sufficient, and perfectly capable of handling life on their own. They rarely ask for help, they don't openly depend on others, and they usually project an image of confidence. From the outside, this can look like emotional maturity. But emotional independence and emotional avoidance are not the same thing. In many cases, what looks like strength is actually a carefully built defense against vulnerability. Many avoidants grow up believing that relying on other people is risky, whether because of inconsistent caregiving, disappointment, criticism, or emotional neglect. They learn an important lesson early in life. If I depend on someone, I might get hurt. As a result, they begin believing that the safest way to live is to need as little from others as possible. Over time, this belief becomes part of their identity. They don't just value independence, they define themselves by it. You'll often hear statements like, "I can handle everything myself, I don't need anyone," or "I'm better off alone." These words sound confident, but they often hide a deeper fear. The fear isn't that other people are weak. The fear is that depending on someone creates the possibility of disappointment, rejection, or emotional pain. So, instead of risking connection, they convince themselves they don't need it. The problem is that human beings are naturally wired for connection. No matter how independent someone becomes, the need for trust, support, and belonging never completely disappears. An avoidant may successfully suppress those needs for a while, but suppressing a need is not the same as eliminating it. Eventually, loneliness begins to surface, even if they rarely admit it out loud. This creates an exhausting, internal conflict. One part of them wants love, closeness, and a meaningful relationship. Another part insists that getting too close will eventually cost them their freedom or emotional stability. Instead of resolving this conflict, they often choose distance because it feels more familiar. They mistake emotional withdrawal for self-control, believing that if they never become too attached, they'll never become deeply hurt. Imagine carrying a heavy shield everywhere you go. At first, it protects you from danger, but after years of carrying it, the shield becomes so heavy that it also prevents you from embracing the people standing right in front of you. That is what emotional walls often become. They begin as protection, but eventually they become barriers that block the very love someone hopes to experience. In relationships, this mindset can be incredibly confusing for their partner. The avoidant may seem deeply interested one week and emotionally unavailable the next. They may genuinely care but struggle to express it consistently because opening up feels like giving away control. Instead of talking about their fears, they retreat into silence. Instead of asking for reassurance, they create more distance. Their partner often interprets this as a lack of love, while the avoidant believes they are simply protecting themselves. Real emotional strength looks very different from emotional isolation. It isn't measured by how little you need other people. It's measured by your ability to remain open, even when vulnerability feels uncomfortable. True confidence isn't refusing support. It's trusting yourself enough to let someone know the real you without constantly fearing that your openness will be used against you. Until avoidants replace the belief that independence equals safety with the understanding that healthy connection requires courage, they are likely to repeat the same relationship patterns, no matter how many new partners enter their lives. One of the biggest reasons avoidants continue repeating the same mistakes is because they focus on changing the story instead of changing the pattern. Every failed relationship comes with a different explanation, a different circumstance, or a different person to blame. In their mind, each breakup feels unique. They tell themselves it wasn't the right time, we weren't compatible. They expected too much. They were too emotional, life was just too stressful. While any of these reasons can be true in certain situations, they often prevent the avoidant from asking a much more important question. Am I responding to relationships in the same way every single time? This is where real self-awareness becomes difficult. It's much easier to analyze what someone else did wrong than to recognize your own recurring behaviors. If every relationship is viewed as an isolated event, then there is no reason to change. But when someone steps back and notices the same emotional reactions happening over again, a completely different picture begins to emerge. Imagine someone driving down the same road every day and hitting the same pothole. After the first time, they might blame bad luck. After the second time, they may complain about the road. But if they continue hitting that same pothole for years without changing their route or paying attention, eventually they have to admit that the problem isn't just the road. It's also the fact that they never adjusted their direction. Relationships often work the same way. Different faces, different places, different circumstances, but the emotional response remains identical. Many avoidants don't intentionally ignore these patterns. Their protective instincts are so automatic that they rarely stop to question them. When conflict appears, they withdraw. When emotional conversations become too deep, they shut down. When someone starts depending on them emotionally, they begin craving distance. These reactions happen so quickly that they feel completely justified in the moment. Instead of asking why they feel uncomfortable, they assume the relationship itself is the problem. This can create an endless cycle of searching for the perfect partner. They believe the next relationship will finally feel easy because the previous person simply wasn't the right match. At first, every new connection seems promising. The excitement of something new temporarily masks old fears. But as emotional intimacy grows, the familiar discomfort returns. Suddenly, the same thoughts appear. Maybe this isn't right. Maybe I've lost my feelings. Maybe I need more freedom. Without realizing it, they repeat the same behaviors that ended previous relationships. The difficult truth is that changing partners does not automatically change emotional habits. A different relationship cannot solve a pattern that lives inside the individual. Until someone recognizes their own contribution to the cycle, history has a way of repeating itself. This isn't about assigning blame, it's about accepting responsibility for the choices that are within your control. Personal growth always begins with honest reflection. Instead of asking, why do I keep meeting the wrong people? A more powerful question is, what do I consistently do when relationships become emotionally challenging? That question shifts the focus from external circumstances to internal behavior. It opens the door to meaningful change instead of endless repetition. Avoidants who develop this level of awareness often experience a turning point. They begin noticing their urge to pull away before acting on it. They recognize that discomfort does not always mean danger. They understand that conflict doesn't automatically signal the end of a relationship. Most importantly, they stop viewing every breakup as an unrelated event and start recognizing the emotional script that has quietly been directing their decisions for years. Once the pattern becomes visible, they finally have the opportunity to respond differently instead of repeating the same mistake yet again. One of the most deceptive traps an avoidant can fall into is confusing temporary relief with a permanent solution. When emotions become intense, their first instinct is often to reduce the pressure as quickly as possible. If a relationship starts demanding deeper conversations, greater vulnerability, or more emotional availability, they may feel overwhelmed. Instead of facing those uncomfortable feelings, look for the fastest escape. That escape could be asking for space, becoming emotionally distant, immersing themselves in work, spending excessive time alone, or slowly disappearing from the relationship altogether. In the moment, these actions seem to work because the emotional tension immediately decreases. Imagine carrying a backpack filled with heavy stones. The instant you take it off, you feel lighter. Your shoulders relax, your breathing becomes easier, and you experience relief. But if that backpack contains everything you need for the journey ahead, leaving it behind doesn't solve your problem. It simply postpones it. This is exactly how emotional avoidance works. Walking away from discomfort may feel good today, but it doesn't eliminate the emotional challenges waiting tomorrow. For many avoidants, distance creates an illusion of peace. They convince themselves that if they stop responding to messages, cancel plans, or emotionally disconnect, the uncomfortable feelings will disappear. And for a short time they often do. Their nervous system calms down, the pressure fades, and they regain a sense of control. Because this relief feels so immediate, the brain begins associating avoidance with safety. Without realizing it, they reinforce the belief that running away is the best solution whenever emotions become difficult. The problem is that emotions rarely disappear simply because they are ignored. They remain beneath the surface, waiting for another situation to bring them back. The unresolved fears, the difficulty trusting others, and the discomfort with vulnerability don't vanish during periods of distance. They simply become quieter until the next close relationship awakens them again. This explains why many avoidants find themselves repeating the exact same cycle in relationship after relationship. At first, everything feels exciting because there is little emotional pressure. As trust grows, anxiety quietly begins to build. Instead of addressing that anxiety, they seek relief by creating distance. Once enough time passes, the loneliness they were trying to avoid slowly takes its place. They start missing the connection they walked away from. They remember the comfort, the laughter, and the emotional support they once had. Yet when another opportunity for closeness appears, they often respond the same way because their brain has been trained to prioritize immediate comfort over lasting fulfillment. Think about someone trying to stop a Avoidant warning light from flashing in their car. Instead of fixing the engine, they simply cover the light with tape. The warning disappears from view, but the mechanical problem continues getting worse. Emotional avoidance works in much the same way. Ignoring uncomfortable feelings doesn't heal them. It only hides them temporarily while they continue influencing future decisions. The challenge is that short-term comfort often comes at the cost of long-term happiness. Every time an avoidant escapes, instead of communicating, they miss an opportunity to build trust. Every difficult conversation they avoid becomes another conversation that eventually has to happen with someone else. Every relationship they leave because vulnerability feels overwhelming teaches their mind that escaping is easier than growing. Real emotional freedom doesn't come from avoiding discomfort. It comes from developing the ability to stay present, even when emotions feel intense. That doesn't mean forcing yourself to ignore fear. It means recognizing that fear is not always a signal to leave. Sometimes it is simply a sign that you are entering unfamiliar emotional territory. Growth has always required stepping beyond what feels comfortable. When avoidants begin choosing honest communication over silent withdrawal, curiosity over fear, and patience over impulsive escape, they slowly retrain themselves to discover that lasting peace isn't found by running away from emotions. It's found by learning how to move through them without letting them control every decision. One of the deepest fears many avoidants carry has very little to do with rejection itself. Surprisingly, what often frightens them even more is the possibility of being fully seen. At first, this may sound confusing. After all, most people assume everyone wants to be understood, accepted, and loved for who they truly are. And on a conscious level, avoidants often do want those things. But beneath that desire lies another powerful belief. If someone sees every part of me, they may eventually decide I'm not enough. This hidden fear quietly shapes many of their decisions without them even realizing it. Being fully seen means allowing another person to witness not only your strengths, but also your weaknesses, your insecurities, your fears, your mistakes, and the emotional wounds you've worked hard to hide. For someone with avoidant tendencies, that level of openness can feel incredibly risky. They may have learned early in life that showing emotions led to criticism, disappointment, or feeling misunderstood. As a result, they developed an unconscious strategy. Keep certain parts of yourself hidden, and you'll stay emotionally safe. This doesn't mean avoidants are dishonest. In many cases, they are sincere and caring people. However, they often reveal themselves in carefully measured amounts. They share enough to maintain the relationship, but stop short of exposing the deepest parts of their emotional world. They become skilled at changing the subject, using humor, focusing on practical matters, or withdrawing completely whenever conversations become too personal. Imagine standing outside a house with every door locked except one small entrance. Visitors are welcome, but only into a single room. The rest of the house remains closed off, hidden from view. That is often how emotional intimacy feels for an avoidant. They allow people to know certain parts of them while protecting the rooms they believe are too vulnerable to reveal at the beginning of a relationship. This strategy often works well. Excitement, attraction, and novelty create enough momentum that deeper emotional conversations can be postponed. But healthy relationships naturally evolve. Over time, partners begin asking more meaningful questions. They want to know about childhood experiences, personal fears, dreams, disappointments, and emotional needs. For many people, these conversations create closeness. For an avoidant, they may trigger anxiety because every answer feels like another step toward emotional exposure. As that anxiety grows, they often begin pulling away without fully understanding why. They might convince themselves they simply need more personal space or that something has changed in the relationship. In reality, nothing may have changed except the level of emotional intimacy. The closer someone gets, the more visible they feel, and visibility can feel incredibly uncomfortable when you've spent years protecting yourself from being judged or hurt. The painful irony is that this very strategy prevents them from experiencing the acceptance they secretly long for. They fear that if someone knew everything about them, they would leave. Yet by never allowing anyone to truly know them, they also prevent anyone from proving that fear wrong. Their emotional walls keep out potential rejection, but they also keep out genuine trust, understanding, and unconditional love. For the partner, this behavior can feel deeply confusing. One day, the avoidant appears affectionate and engaged. The next day, they seem emotionally distant without any obvious reason. The partner may believe they have done something wrong, when in reality, the avoidant is often reacting to internal fears rather than external events. The relationship begins feeling unsafe not because of what the other person has done, but because closeness itself has activated old protective habits. Real intimacy requires courage. It requires believing that being known is more valuable than remaining perfectly protected. It means accepting that vulnerability always carries some level of risk, but it also creates the possibility of the deepest emotional connection. Avoidants who gradually learn to lower their emotional defenses discover something powerful. They don't lose themselves by allowing someone to see them completely. Instead, they often find the acceptance, security, and connection they have been searching for all along, hidden just beyond the walls they worked so hard to build. Many avoidants reach a point where they genuinely regret the relationships they have lost. They think about the person who loved them, the opportunities they let slip away, and the conversations they wish they had handled differently. They may replay memories in their mind, wonder what could have been, or even miss someone long after the relationship has ended. But despite all those emotions, many still repeat the same mistakes in future relationships. Why? Because regret alone does not create change. Feeling bad about the past is not the same as developing the habits needed to build a different future. Think about someone who wants to become physically fit. They might deeply regret years of unhealthy choices. They may feel disappointed every time they look in the mirror. But no amount of regret will strengthen their body unless they begin exercising consistently. The transformation doesn't happen because they wish things had been different. It happens because they start doing different things every single day. Emotional growth works exactly the same way. Many avoidants mistake emotional pain for personal growth. They assume that because they suffered after a breakup, they have automatically changed. But pain is a teacher only if someone is willing to learn the lesson. Otherwise, pain simply becomes another experience that repeats itself. Missing someone doesn't automatically improve communication. Feeling lonely doesn't automatically increase vulnerability. Regretting emotional distance doesn't suddenly make closeness feel safe. Lasting change requires more than emotion. It requires intentional action. One reason change is so difficult is because old habits are incredibly efficient. The brain loves familiar routines because they require less energy. For an avoidant, pulling away during emotional stress has often been practiced for years, sometimes even decades. That response becomes automatic. When conflict appears, the mind immediately searches for the quickest path back to emotional comfort. Unless a conscious decision interrupts that pattern, the same reaction happens again without much thought. Imagine walking through a forest along the same trail every day. After enough time, that path becomes clear and easy to follow. Now imagine trying to create a completely new trail through thick trees and bushes. It feels slower, harder, and much more uncomfortable. But with enough repetition, the new path eventually becomes just as natural as the old one. Emotional habits follow the same principle. Healthy communication, vulnerability, and staying present during difficult moments may feel awkward at first, but they become easier every time they are practiced. This is why true transformation often looks ordinary rather than dramatic. It happens in small decisions that most people never notice. Choosing to stay in a difficult conversation instead of walking away. Saying, "I'm feeling overwhelmed," instead of disappearing without explanation. Asking for a little time to process emotions rather than ending the relationship out of fear. Listening without becoming defensive. Admitting mistakes without making excuses. These moments may seem small, but they slowly reshape a person's emotional life. Another important truth is that change requires humility. It means accepting that your instincts may not always lead you toward what is healthiest. An avoidant may feel an intense urge to create distance, but that feeling alone doesn't necessarily mean distance is the right answer. Learning to pause before reacting is one of the most powerful skills a person can develop. That pause creates space between emotion and action, allowing thoughtful choices instead of automatic ones. Growth also requires patience. No one completely changes lifelong patterns overnight. There will be uncomfortable moments, setbacks, and times when old habits return. The difference is that someone committed to growth doesn't see those moments as failure. They see them as opportunities to practice a better response the next time. Progress is built through consistency, not perfection. The avoidants who truly break free from repeating the same mistakes are not necessarily the ones who feel the most regret. They are the ones who become willing to face temporary discomfort in order to create lasting emotional health. They stop measuring change by how they feel and start measuring it by how they respond over time. Those repeated choices build new habits, stronger relationships, and a completely different future than the one their old patterns would have created. As we bring this message to a close, remember that avoidants don't repeat the same mistakes because they are destined to fail at love. More often, they repeat them because they are following emotional patterns that have been reinforced for years. Those patterns may have once helped them survive difficult experiences. But what protects you in one season of life can quietly limit you in another. The greatest obstacle isn't the past itself. It's allowing the past to dictate every future decision. The moment someone recognizes that their automatic reactions are learned rather than permanent, they take the first and most important step toward real transformation. Awareness doesn't instantly solve the problem, but it opens the door to a different future. If you've loved an avoidant, this understanding can help you. Replace confusion with clarity. Their distance, silence, or emotional withdrawal may have left you questioning your worth, wondering if you weren't enough, or if you somehow caused them to pull away. In many cases, their behavior says far more about their internal fears than it does about your value. That doesn't mean you should excuse unhealthy behavior or sacrifice your own emotional well-being. Healthy relationships require effort from both people. You cannot heal someone who refuses to face their own patterns, and you should never lose yourself trying to prove that you're worthy of being loved. Your responsibility is to protect your peace while allowing others to take responsibility for their own growth. If, however, you recognize these avoidant tendencies within yourself, this isn't a reason to feel shame. It's an invitation to grow. The fact that you become aware of these patterns means you already possess something incredibly valuable. The ability to choose differently. Every time you stay present instead of running, communicate instead of shutting down, and lean into honesty instead of hiding behind emotional walls, you weaken the old habits that have controlled your relationships for so long. Growth isn't about becoming a completely different person overnight. It's about making one courageous decision after another until those decisions become your new normal. The truth is that love has never been about finding someone perfect. It's about becoming emotionally capable of receiving and giving love in a healthy way. Strong relationships aren't built because two people never experience fear, conflict, or uncertainty. They're built because both people choose to face those moments together instead of allowing fear to make their decisions. Emotional intimacy will always require vulnerability, patience, honesty, and trust. Those qualities cannot grow in the presence of constant avoidance. But the moment someone chooses courage over comfort, healing over hiding, and connection over control, everything begins to change. So as you leave this message today, ask yourself one powerful question. What emotional pattern have I been repeating without realizing it? Because the quality of your future relationships will always be shaped by the choices you make today. Don't let yesterday's fears write tomorrow's story. Every healthy conversation, every act of vulnerability, every moment of honesty, and every decision to stay instead of run is another step toward the life and relationships you truly deserve. If this message spoke to you, share it with someone who may need to hear it. And remember this, the strongest people are not those who never struggle with fear, they are the ones who refuse to let fear have the final word.